Let's go back to the Harlem Renaissance and look at the inspiration and impact of one of the most important times in history. The Harlem Renaissance was the intellectual and cultural revival of African American music, dance, art, fashion, literature, and politics, all centered in Harlem, New York City during the 1920s and 30s. Langston Hughes once said that Harlem was not so much a place as a state of mind, the cultural metaphor for Black America itself. At the time, also known as the New Negro Movement, the Harlem Renaissance represented an upsurge of new racial attitudes and ideals. And this flowering of culture was widely considered a rebirth of African American arts. It was inspired by the iconoclastic spirit of the times and an extension of the struggle against oppression, as Harlem artists sought new forms, images, and techniques to express themselves. So, why Harlem? You can see the arrow here pointing to New York City. That's where Harlem is. And as you can see on this map, Harlem is a particular area within Manhattan. So, how did the Harlem Renaissance start? Let's look at the historical roots. We need to see the Great Migration. During and after the Civil War, the vast majority of African Americans, about 90%, lived in the South. However, between 1910 and 1939, the African American population in the North rose by about 20%. This occurrence is called the Great Migration. And cities like New York, Chicago, and Philadelphia had some of the biggest population increases. Harlem, in particular, became a hub of Black culture. And the 1930 census showed that Black residents comprised 70% of Harlem's population. So we know what the Great Migration is, but what caused it? African Americans sought to leave the Jim Crow laws of the South and find a more racially tolerant region. Environmental hazards also displaced many African American workers in the South. And World War I and restrictive immigration reform led to new factory job opportunities in the urban North cities. All of these factors contributed to over 1 million African Americans making their way to northern cities. Now let's see some of the cultural effects of the Harlem Renaissance in domains like music, art, and literature. As far as music, some genres associated with the Harlem Renaissance are blues, ragtime, Dixie, and jazz. These were very popular at the time. Probably most famous was the evolution of jazz, which is quintessentially the American music. Jazz at this time was developing complex chords and syncopated rhythms, intricate leads, improvisation, big band and swing, as well as the Harlem Stride, which was the incorporation of piano in jazz, which previously had only really used brass instruments. Piano added a level of richness and sophistication, which led to city acceptance, and it was now viewed as cosmopolitan and highbrow. Some notable musicians were legends like Duke Ellington, Louis Armstrong, Billie Holiday, Cab Calloway, Jelly Roll Morton, Bessie Smith. Here's the Duke. It don't mean a thing if it ain't got that swing. What about art? At this time, it was a very exciting period for art as new movements sprang up like Surrealism, Impressionism, and Art Deco. In fact, the slides you're looking at have an Art Deco style. Modern art presented African Americans in a new light with an emotional depth and complexity. It was realistic as African American artists portrayed the pride and pain of everyday experiences, bold colors, stylized forms, and looking to Africa for stylistic inspiration and the link to heritage. Some notable artists: Aaron Douglas, William Johnson, Jacob Lawrence, Archibald Motley Jr., Richmond Barthé, and Augusta Savage. Jacob Lawrence said, "When the subject is strong, simplicity is the only way to treat it." All right, and literature. You see on the left right there is a copy of The Crisis from 1929. That's the official magazine of the NAACP and oldest Black-oriented magazine in the world. You saw writing in this time including magazines like The Crisis, novels, and poetry. This was exciting because it was the first time that mainstream publishers and critics took African American literature seriously. Works expressed Black pride, emotional depth, and the reality of racial discrimination. Some notable writers were Langston Hughes, Countee Cullen, Jean Toomer, Zora Neale Hurston, Jesse Fawcett, Claude McKay, and W.E.B. Du Bois. Zora Neale Hurston said, "Those that don't got it can't show it. Those that got it can't hide it." All about style. So, why did the Harlem Renaissance end? A few main factors. For one, the Great Depression came along as the stock market crashed. As a result, people didn't have the money to spend on luxuries or to really spend on the arts. Prohibition ended, so you didn't see people going out late at night to speakeasies and seeking out late-night entertainment. Migration slowed down as well as communities settled. There might not exactly be a particular end point, but the Harlem race riots of 1935 were viewed as a death knell as Harlem lost its luster and its sense of optimism around that time. So, what is the legacy of the Harlem Renaissance? It really redefined the African American identity. It brought about a sense of Black pride, and it informed the civil rights movement. It redefined how African Americans saw themselves and how other races viewed African Americans. It also ushered in social progress, mainstream acceptance, and challenging stereotypes. Art of the time had emotional depth and complexity, and it was embraced by publishers, critics, and the masses alike. Challenging these stereotypes, the Harlem Renaissance was viewed as cool by audiences, both white and Black. And also the Harlem Renaissance is renowned for a cultural aesthetic, the Jazz Age. And you know what? Maybe it never really ended, it just evolved. You see, the Jazz Age and that style has led directly to the beat poetry of decades later, Motown, rock and roll, hip hop. The Jazz Age and Harlem Renaissance style is always modern and is quintessentially cool. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed.